It's May 2021. The first effective COVID vaccines are making their way to the masses. President Biden announces plans to inoculate 70% of adults in the country by July 4th. Tim Tebow reveals he's joining the Jacksonville Jaguars in training camp. And Jeff Bezos is a mere 2 months away from shooting into space on his own dick rocket. It's looking like a summer of unlikely hope and incredible human innovation. The first bits of good news we've all had since the start of the pandemic. Not to be outdone, the New World development team with great anticipation announces an August 2021 launch date. With this announcement, they also released one of their last alpha patch notes, detailing a slew of updates, bug fixes, and content coming to the game in preparation for their upcoming closed beta and eventual launch. Buried amongst those notes is the description of a new mechanic intended to gate their expeditions, or dungeons, as everyone who's ever played a video game calls them.
The Tuning Orb.
This orb will increase the rewards of the expeditions, the one line of explanation offers. Little did the devs know that this one addition would put them on a path of infamy amongst MMO gamers the world over, as well as hasten a player exodus the like of which no one in the industry could fathom. That's right, the Tuning Orb, New World's magic bullet right to its own head.
Back and to the left. Back and to the left. Back and to the...
What's up, YouTube? Hot Soup here. Thank you for clicking on the video. Before we get started, I just want to ask you, if you like the video or the topic, please take a moment to hit that like button. I'm just starting out on YouTube. Every click helps me out a ton. In this video, we're going to take a hypercritical deep dive into what I feel is the worst addition to the MMO genre since its inception: New World's Tuning Orbs. I personally feel this single mechanic in the game led to the exodus of literally hundreds of thousands of players, if not millions, after the game's launch. All the while, Amazon Game Studios stubbornly held on to this and silenced, deflected, or ignored the criticism as player numbers dwindled. Only now, after the game's population has been decimated, does there seem to be true change on the horizon. So as we approach the 1-year anniversary of this mechanic's fated addition to the game, I thought you might be interested in joining me as I dissect why Tuning Orbs killed New World's launch. IMO.
Hansu.
First, an explanation of Tuning Orbs to those who may not be familiar with them. New World has a number of instance dungeons. They call them expeditions, which is content available to a party of 3 to 5 players to run through, and they have different themes, environmental puzzles, boss mechanics, and rewards. These dungeons can take typically 30 to 40 minutes to complete and are roundly commended as the game's best PvE content. Unfortunately, in order to access them, a party member has to use a Tuning Orb, which serves as a one-time use key to unlock that specific dungeon for the whole group. In addition to the dungeons, Tuning Orbs are also the means to access arena boss battles. These are short 5 to 10 minute fights that have a team of 5 players focused on a single boss, and the bosses have their own unique mechanics and rewards. The dungeons and the arenas constitute about 80% of the PvE content available to a max level player in the endgame. You might be asking yourself, what's the problem? Dungeons needing keys in a video game is not a new thing. The problem lies in the acquisition of these keys, primarily the resources and time needed to grind out before you could even craft one. The state of the game at launch with its limited endgame content choices also served to compound this problem further. To add insult to injury, they implemented time gates on these orbs. You could only craft 3 a week for the endgame dungeons, and they weren't tradable on the in-game market. This severely hampered progression for many people who didn't have the time to invest in crafting the orbs or being a large company that pooled resources for their crafters. I mean, depending on a person's luck, it would sometimes take players literally days to gather enough resources to craft a single orb, and that orb only afforded them a 40-minute experience in the dungeon. People basically felt their time wasn't being valued. The grind was really awful at launch. Hopefully this makes it clear how bad it was. Now, keep in mind that you had to be a level 200 stonecutter in order to craft the endgame orbs. That's dozens of hours of grind, just beating rocks all day if you weren't getting any help. And to craft the Lazarus Orb dungeon, you had to make quintessences, which required a very high level Arcana skill level, which also took dozens of hours. So please keep those prerequisites in mind when we're diving into the numbers here. Today, as you can see on the right, crafting a Guardian of Genesis orb is fairly reasonable. A big factor to that is being able to buy the corrupted lodestone mats from the market. Prior to the February update, it wasn't possible. You had to go out and grind really boring corruption portals with as many people as you can muster on the server. And depending on RNG, you could go hours before getting a corrupted fragment or shard. And the moat requirements were nerfed big time as well. So this is today. I would say it would take about 3 to 4 hours of grinding portals, stone cutting, and the faction rep to buy the chisels if you want to do it today. You can also buy a lot of these mats on the market, like I had mentioned before, to cut down the time needed to make an orb. So let's compare this to the last time they made a significant change to the orb requirements, which was in December. We don't have to get into the minutia here, just know they lowered the corruption portal resources a bit and the moat requirements significantly. It's about a 50% reduction all told. It was definitely welcomed by the player base when the February patch came around. But I want to talk about launch. Oh my god. Just looking at these numbers again has my hairs on end. 10 corrupted lodestones would take you days to farm. And remember, they aren't tradable resources. They were all bind on pickup, so you couldn't trade face to face or put them on the market. You just had to get out there and close portals for hours. The moats were an issue too. If you were on a really populated server, you basically had to camp spots or spend a lot of gold on the market. It was awful. So from launch to today, it's about a 90% reduction in the resources needed to craft orbs. Let that sink in. Also, as I mentioned, you can now trade the corruption portal resources, right? So you can just go straight, and you can also go straight to the faction vendor and buy orbs. So most people don't even bother even crafting anymore. And if you think this is bad, let's quickly look at the Lazarus orb. Boom! Goes the dynamite. 20 corrupted lodestones at launch. People would go weeks without crafting this thing, and you needed a bind on pickup resource called Blight Seeds from the Genesis dungeon to even make one of these. This is now about a 98% reduction in resources needed today. Isn't that nuts? The feedback to Tuning Orbs in the alpha was incredibly negative. The red flags were apparent to everyone, but AGS changed nothing. The effects of all this were immediately apparent in the player numbers a month from launch. That's when a good number of players started getting to max level and hitting this wall in the endgame. The concurrent player numbers began a free fall, but AGS changed nothing. As a former software developer myself, I try to put myself in their shoes to understand what would lead a dev team to create such a backward mechanic in the first place. I think we have to start here at the stone cutting table. Once the game shifted from a survival Rust-type build-a-base game to a more theme park MMO, the stone cutting profession was practically useless. Remember, they removed base building in the open world completely, so we didn't need stone bricks anymore. This is pure conjecture on my part, but I think the devs always intended to gate their dungeon content somehow, but they saw an opportunity to reuse the assets they developed for stone cutting, and so avoided having to remove the profession completely by simply tying them together. I like to imagine there was a eureka moment when a developer came up with this on a whiteboard somewhere, because it does have some neat synergy on paper. New World's strength is undeniably in the gorgeous biomes and open world fauna and flora ever present in the game. My best guess here is that the devs thought players would prefer to be out in the open world, gathering, hunting, fighting in PvP for those resources, and the dungeons would be a simple reward for all that hard work. Which means they don't get the average MMO player at all. And the average MMO player has an insatiable drive for progression. If you put the best drops in an instance dungeon, that's what people will want to do over and over and over again. And really, that's what we're all familiar with. This identity tug of war with the original open world PvP concept versus the instance PvE direction the game eventually went in is constant in many flawed designs we experience in New World. But why didn't the dev teams pivot? They definitely had other priorities, like the massive dupe bugs and the funky client control stuff that people were abusing everywhere. But I don't think that's it. I think fault lies in these things. The corruption portals. A big component of crafting tuning orbs is using resource drops from corruption portals. And it's unfortunately dictated by RNG. At launch, you could grind portals for hours and not get enough resources to craft an orb. If they removed orbs from the game, it would invalidate a whole pillar of their open world PvE content. The blowback from all those who grinded up their stone cutting to 200 would also be massive. So AGS changed nothing. So how did the players react to all of this? Predictably, we found a workaround. Since we couldn't trade orbs or their mats, people just charged for open spots and advertise in global chat. It's simple. The person with the orb sets a price. If you agree to the cost, you get invited into the party, you pay the orb holder, and just run through the dungeon like normal. Some players felt the cost was justifiable. The grind to get orbs was insane. They also pointed out that you would end up making gold in the dungeon run anyway. Depending on the price you paid, you could actually come out a bit ahead. But there's no denying this isn't normal. This isn't how an MMO is supposed to work, right? The large companies that own the profitable territories were making a killing. The class divide was very apparent on every server. These companies bought and sold orbs for large sums of gold, especially early on. People spend their real lives paying others unreasonable amounts of money to do the things they like to do. And to deal with that in a game that's supposed to be an outlet for escape from the real world, I think it just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I see both sides of the argument here, but I definitely lean on the side of WTF. I mean, why does this even have to be a thing? And all the while, the devs have been completely silent on this. They avoid the topic like the plague. I think they know it's embarrassing that their game is in this state where people have to pay for dungeon runs, but it's easier for them just to ignore it. I think they know if they got rid of this loophole that there would be a riot of players on their forums. The other impact of all this is harder to talk about or prove. With gold being so important in the economy that the Tuning Orbs created, I don't think it's a stretch to say people felt pushed to gold selling websites. The grind was so massive and gold was really the only way to avoid it. Someone on Reddit admitted they had spent tens of thousands of dollars on these RMT sites. They posted screenshots as proof. They mentioned how good it felt to keep a town's table upgraded and helping their company members with Tuning Orb purchases. I think the game has a serious RMT issue. It's not helped by the wealth disparity with the large guilds that own towns that are basically selling their excess gold for real money. It's an open secret at this point. So to wrap this up, I feel the excessive and unreasonable grind for Tuning Orbs at launch led to a toxic environment with the players demanding gold from each other more than anything else in order to experience content and progress their characters. This also served to highlight the wealth disparity between the large companies and the rest of the player base. Meanwhile, the devs were slow to respond or just unwilling to do so at the risk of gutting their fragile economy and/or limited content they had in the game. All of this led to extreme player frustration. The proof is a massive player exodus at a time when a significant portion were arriving at the endgame. Fortunately, in the last dev blog, we got this.
I think, Expedition Orbs is a continual topic. We made some, I think, starting to make some good changes in February with giving more access, but I think we've got more ways to go there. I think our vision for the future is a world where orbs aren't required for expeditions, but instead potentially buff the rewards you get from them. So
how that will work is yet to be seen. Hopefully they make it an individual requirement to have for the enhancement and not at the party level, because that's not going to change anything. I do have high hopes though. I do think this team is very talented. They're just lacking experience. But there's no denying the damage is done. When I tell former players the cost has been lowered on the orbs, they still react very negatively. It's either all or nothing for those people. I'm not sure if any modification to the orb system will bring these players back. Their experience was just so soured. Just like Tim Tebow's performance in Jacksonville that got him booted before the season started. Sorry, Tim, I love you. Well, that's it for this video. I hope it was informative and starts a discussion. I'd love to hear from you. Are you one of the few pro Tuning Orb people? Sound off in the comments. I love to respond to everyone. And hey, if you like this video, please consider giving it a like. And if you want to see more of this content, please hit the subscriber button. It's how I know I'm on the right track. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you in Eternum.